I used to think that an MP shouldn't get paid very much and shouldn't be able to do other work outside Parliament. I think I was wrong on both counts. On the first point, because you get what you pay for. And if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. It's hardly surprising that this country isn't run better, because those people who can earn much more go off and do earn much more. And on the second point, if we keep wanting MPs to be full-time, then they're not going to be topping up their salaries in potentially very lucrative roles in, for example, commerce. And I want politicians to be stakeholders in the economy that either they build or they wreck. So my feeling is quite clear, and this is not anything that an elected politician would dare say on your show, but MPs should be paid a great deal more, and Gary Lineker's completely right.
But isn't it a vocation to be an MP, to represent your constituents? Isn't that a vocation? You're not doing it for the salary, surely?
Yeah, it was for me, and I took a big pay cut to be a member of Parliament, and I don't regret it. But at the same time, having people in a vocation that they're not very good at is not as effective for the country as having people in a vocation that they are good at. And let's not pretend, if you didn't get better people by paying more, then the top people in businesses would not get the highest salaries. And by and large, that is the case. And secondly, more fundamentally than that, it's not theoretical. I know plenty of people who said, well done, Lembit, for going into business, but I've stayed where I am. I'm not going to go into, I'm going into politics. I stayed where I am. I've stayed in business. And here's my big house. And here's my comfortable life. And I don't have to put up with all the rubbish that you had to put up with by being in the public eye and being endlessly vilified. And in my opinion, there is a certain amount of danger money deserving of MPs, because the job is a very challenging one where you lose your privacy and oftentimes you just get libelled, and you have, unless you're really willing to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds to defend yourself, you don't really have much recourse.
What do you think to that, Lowry?
I think that running the country is different from running, let's say, ICI or Shell. Those companies that run for profit. We would hope that our country is run for the benefit of the people. Therefore, this notion that only the biggest brains are capable of doing that, big brain, big ego, in my experience, actually, I would rather that nobody was allowed to be an MP until they'd worked on minimum wage for a while, until they find out what it's like to work at the bottom, because there are far more of those people they're representing than the little stratum at the top.
Very different, though, to work on minimum wage if you're from a wealthy family. I mean, you could always spend a couple of months living on minimum wage. Would that still give you an insight?
I think it would absolutely give you an insight. I mean, I don't want big brains. I think we've had big brains. Rishi Sunak is apparently a big brain. Here's the man who thought it was a great idea that all kids should study maths till they're 18. Well, that's going to sink without trace, that plan, isn't it? Big brains are not the right thing. We want people with lots of empathy, we want people with life experience, we want people who can communicate, who can understand. I want somebody who doesn't come from a family where they went to a very expensive private school. I want somebody who's had to try and fund their parent through a care home, who's had to wait for an operation because they haven't got private GP, who understands the effect that laws make on the vast majority of the population.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. I totally agree with you. This idea that somehow if you pay a politician, which for me should be a calling, not just a vocation, a full-on calling, if you pay them more money, they're going to be better people. I mean, people I know who are on 100k a year, 200k a year, aren't more intelligent. They just seem to have fallen into the finance sector. You know, what do we want? Loads of politicians earning loads of money because they're really good within banking. As you say, I want people who've been on the minimum wage. I want people who've worked in the media, who've worked as teachers. And a lot of the politicians that I've either met who I know, they usually, I mean, this is maybe a bit of a stereotype, but they usually fall into two camps. They're either people who have a calling, who really want to change this country, or they're massive narcissists. And it's usually the massive narcissists on the most amount of money.
Lembit, we don't want egos, we want people that have struggled. What do you think about that?
We want people who are confident. I don't think we want egotists. I agree with your panel on that. And I understand the struggling point. I've been on the dole, and frankly, I've been insolvent in my time. And you're right to say that does give you an insight that you wouldn't have if you've always had a silver spoon in your mouth. But here's the central point. Everything you've just said about politicians can be said about people in the media as well. People will assume that all three of you are millionaires because you're on national television. They probably assume the same of me. This isn't my house, by the way, in the background.
It looks very lavish.
I wish it was.
You just
but
finished
the
your
reality
cleaning
is,
round, have you? Put the mop down for a minute.
This is my spare room.
Yeah, well, it looks great.
But the reality is, the same thing is said about people in the media, and they say, well, it should be a calling because you've got the privilege of being famous, and so you shouldn't be paid very much. Where do you draw the line? And I don't want to be rude about this, but I hear people saying this because it's almost the politics of envy. Oh, politicians don't deserve to be paid well because it's a calling. Actually, they deserve to be.
I think that they're paid quite well as it is.
Yeah.
I think that, being paid 85k or whatever, which is
over double the average.
Yes. I think 150k for a cabinet minister.
Yes, it can be. Yeah. And also
that's a lot of money out in the real world. In business, it's not.
Yeah, but it's not much in business. And here's the point: it's not about what the average salary is. It's what quality of person would be paid that in the private sector, in my opinion. Now, I don't expect private sector salaries, but many of the best politicians, they've been making hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. The Prime Minister is not the best paid person in the country, even though it's one of the most important jobs. So I understand you've got a perfectly legitimate position. I just take a different view. But once I agree with Gary Lineker, I do think we don't pay enough. And that is one of the reasons the country's in the mess it's in.
The PM doesn't get paid very much, but he does, or she does, tend to make an awful lot of money after leaving office with books and speeches and all sorts. Lembit, please stay with us. We're going to take a few calls now and see what our viewers think. Edward from Dumbartonshire, what's your thoughts on this? Do we need to pay more to get better candidates?
Yes, Storm. I think you get what you pay for. There is a necessity for a level playing field, I think. Some MPs will be in a more advantageous position than others. For example, an MP in the north of the country might have less access to what used to be Fleet Street than MPs from the south. But as regards extra monies, I think MPs should be paid more.
How much?
To do what they do. Yes, I think they should be paid more, but I think there should be a much more stringent assessment of what they earn elsewhere. For example, if they are in the jungle, any monies they earn should be paid directly back into their constituency to help people in food banks.
Can I just
for example,
I don't know who you're referring to.
Can I just challenge you, Edward?
Absolute obscenity.
Edward, can I just challenge you on something you said that also Lembit said? You get what you pay for. That's tremendously condescending.
Massively insulting.
Just for example, to a cleaner who may be paid, 10.50. Hang on, 10.50. Are you saying that that's all that person deserves? Well, that's the job they ended up doing. Because actually, I don't think you get what you pay for.
I have ever heard on television.
Edward, Lowry's just made a point that feels like what you've said is condescending. What's your response to
people who are on low pay?
Yes, I don't. Is she going home to feed the gas meter with pennies? No.
I pay my bills. I'm not well paid, Edward.
No, you're not low paid. Of course you're not.
Not well paid.
And are you sympathetic?
When I dog groom, I work just above minimum wage, right?
Yes,
minimum
darling.
Wage,
if you go into a bank and say you're an unemployed welder, or if you go into a bank and say you're an MP, you will get a better line of credit.
That's true.
Okay, Edward, I feel like this is getting a bit heated, but your point was made, and thank you very much for calling in. Lembit, what do you think about that? That it's actually quite a condescending thing to say that you get what you pay for?
If that was true, in that case, we should all be paid the same in some communist system. My parents were born in a system in Estonia, which ended up in the Soviet Union. The system doesn't like that. In a capitalist system, when you pay more, you generally get people in these kinds of jobs that are a little bit better. And there are great teachers and great nurses who don't do it for the money. But in my judgment, that doesn't work with politics unless you say, earn what you like. As a private sector person, but in that case, no one should moan about the second jobs that MPs have had. My view, £140,000 a year for MPs. Get rid of the entire expenses system, apart from travel, and then just let's go on with running the country, because we spend hundreds of hours a year defending, or thousands of hours a year, defending or criticising politicians for what they earn, and making their eye off the ball, as has the media.
We're saying that MPs should get more money. How much are we talking here? What would be comparable in the private sector? What could they be earning?
Well, for a good for a cabinet minister role job, I would expect it would be more like £250,000. But what I'm saying is, an MP should get £140,000, no expenses for living, accommodation, everything else, just like a travel card for the country that they have to justify the travel for, and that's an end to it. That way you don't have all this expensive stuff, you don't have expensive scandals, and the MPs can decide where they live and how they live. Is that a lot more? It's a bit more, yes, but it actually reduces the administration in politics, and also, from my point of view, is enough for the kind of jobs that we want people to have. If it is condescending to talk about minimum wage, let's make sure that the panelists here come on to your show for minimum wage from now on.
Well,
this is just crazy. Stop, seriously. Like, there's people working in the city.
We can't have different rules here.
Look, there's people in the city gaming the system on, say, $250,000 a year, and then there's teachers, really good teachers, on 40 grand a year. That you can't correlate earnings with skill unless you're maybe talking about surgeons or certain industries. You can't do that. The system's already unfair.